A helicopter crew filmed the Jersey Devil carrying a dead body through the New Jersey Pine Barrens. I was operating the camera, and what we captured that day destroyed my life. September 26th, 2019. We were running a simple deer count when my thermal camera locked onto something moving through the forest. 7 feet tall, walking upright, carrying what looked like a person draped over its shoulder, except that body had no heat signature. It had been dead for hours. We got 90 seconds of clear footage. Wings folded against its back, legs bent backward, 3-toed tracks pressed deep into the sand. 2 hours later, armed men showed up and classified everything. The search team found torn clothing and those tracks, then suddenly closed the case. My crew was scattered across the country. I was told to stay quiet, but I kept a copy of the footage. And I just learned 6 more people have vanished in that same spot since 2015. So why is someone working so hard to hide what's really out there? My name doesn't matter. What matters is that for 11 years, I operated thermal imaging systems on wildlife survey helicopters across the mid-Atlantic. And I was good at it, really good. I could tell you the difference between a white-tailed doe and a coyote from 1,200 feet up based solely on heat, signature, and gait pattern. I knew how to adjust for canopy interference, how to log coordinates down to the meter, how to stay calm when a pilot had to dodge a cell tower in low visibility. It was technical work, sometimes boring, occasionally beautiful, always precise. The kind of job where you follow checklists, file reports, and go home. I'm not that person anymore. What I'm about to tell you cost me my career, my sense of safety, and any illusion I had that we understand what's out there in the places we've decided to call wilderness. I've kept quiet for 5 years, moved 3 times, changed my phone number twice, learned to sleep with the lights on, but silence has a weight to it, and I can't carry it anymore. Not after I learned what's still happening out there. This is about September 2019, a routine deer population survey over the New Jersey Pine Barrens. 3 of us in a contracted Bell 407. Roger flying, Dr. Lindsay Huey from New Jersey, Fish and Wildlife in the observer seat, and me in the back running the FLIR thermal camera. We'd been doing this work together for 2 seasons, professional, efficient, no drama. Roger was former Coast Guard, 15 years flying search and rescue before he went civilian. Lindsay had a PhD in cervid population dynamics and knew the Pinelands ecosystem better than anyone I'd met. And me, I was the tech guy. I made sure the equipment worked and the data was clean. The contract was straightforward. 4 weeks of grid flights over 1.1 million acres of protected forest to get an accurate deer count before hunting season. The Pine Barrens are one of the largest stretches of wilderness left in the Northeast Pitch. Pine, Atlantic white cedar, cranberry bogs, and sandy soil that drains so fast you can walk through an area that was flooded the day before. From the air, it's monotonous. Green canopy broken by fire roads and the occasional glint of cedar water, the kind of landscape where you can fly for 20 minutes without seeing a single structure. I'd heard the stories, of course. Everyone who works the Pinelands hears them eventually. The Jersey Devil. The 1,909 panic when over 1,000 people across South Jersey reported seeing something with wings and hooves terrorizing towns for a solid week. Schools closed. Factories shut down. Pauses formed to hunt it. Then, nothing like someone flipped a switch and it was over. Local historians called it mass hysteria, a hoax, misidentified cranes, or a publicity stunt for a circus. I believe that. I'm a man who trusts instruments, data, repeatable observations. I'd flown over the Pine Barrens dozens of times and never seen anything stranger than a black bear or a bald eagle. The forest had its reputation. People went missing sometimes, sure, but people go missing in every large wilderness area, get turned around on an unmarked trail, suffer a medical emergency, make a bad decision. It happens. What I'm telling you now, I wouldn't have believed either. Not before September 26, 2019. We lifted off from Joint Base McGuire Dix Lakehurst at 6:47 a.m., right on schedule. The weather was perfect, clear skies, light wind, temperature in the low 60s. Roger flew us out over the northern section of the Barrens while I booted up the thermal system and ran diagnostics. Everything checked green. Lindsay pulled up the day's flight plan on her tablet, a series of parallel transects over the Mullica River Basin, an especially remote area marked as restricted watershed. 18 miles from the nearest paved road, no camping allowed. No trails maintained, just forest. I remember thinking it was going to be an easy day. I've thought about that a lot since. How normal everything felt, how routine. By the time we reached our survey altitude and began the first transect, the sun was fully up and the forest below had settled into its daytime rhythms. I called out heat signatures as they appeared on my screen: deer, deer, coyote, deer, black bear moving through a thicket. Lindsay logged each one with coordinates and estimated size. Roger kept us steady at 1,200 feet, following the GPS track with the precision of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. We'd been at it for 3 days already, logged over 400 animals. Seen nothing unusual. That was about to change. September 23rd through 25th passed exactly the way they were supposed to. We'd lift off just after dawn, fly programmed transects until early afternoon, land for fuel and lunch, then finish the day's grid before sunset. The work had a rhythm to it, the steady thrum of the rotor, Roger's occasional course corrections over the intercom, Lindsay's quiet count as she tallied species and age classes. My world narrowed to the thermal display in front of me, a grayscale landscape where living things glowed white against cool backgrounds. The pine barrens from above are hypnotic in their sameness. Endless green canopy, broken here and there by the geometric scars of old cranberry bogs and the pale threads of sand roads that peter out into nothing. Sometimes you'd catch the glint of water, cedar runs stained tea-brown by tannic acid, small lakes that appeared and disappeared depending on the season, but mostly it was just forest. Dense, featureless, unbroken. Roger liked to joke that flying over the barrens was like mowing the world's biggest lawn. Same view, different square. But I didn't mind the monotony. There was something peaceful about it, actually. Up there at 1,200 feet, sealed in our bubble of noise and purpose, the world felt manageable, measurable. Everything reduced to coordinates and data points on the ground, Lindsay told us. The pinelands were a different story. Trails that weren't on any map, abandoned settlements from the 18th century, slowly being reclaimed by forest. The ruins of old iron furnaces and glass factories, back when the region was industrial rather than protected. She'd done field work down there for her dissertation and said the silence was absolute. Not just quiet silent. No bird calls, no insect hum, just your own breathing and footsteps. The locals won't go into certain areas, she mentioned during one of our lunch breaks on the 24th. We were sitting in the shade of the hangar at McGuire, eating sandwiches and reviewing the morning's data, especially near the cedar swamps. They'll tell you it's because the ground's unstable or the navigation's tricky, but you can see it in their faces. It's something else. Roger laughed. Don't tell me you believe the Jersey Devil stories. Lindsay shrugged. I believe something's made people uncomfortable out there for a very long time. Whether it's a cryptid or just the accumulated weight of isolation and bad luck, I couldn't say. I remember that conversation. Remember thinking it was interesting from an anthropological perspective how wilderness creates its own mythology, how humans process the unknown. I didn't think about it again until 3 days later. September 26th started the same as the others. Clear morning, smooth flight out, Roger setting us up on our 4th transect over the Mullica River Basin. This was deep pinelands, restricted watershed, no public access, the kind of area where even the fire roads were gated and chained. From our altitude, it looked pristine, untouched. Just pitch pine and Atlantic white cedar stretching to the horizon. We'd been flying the pattern for maybe 90 minutes. I'd logged black bears, a dozen deer, a pair of coyotes, the usual distribution. Lindsay was running calculations on her tablet, estimating total population density. Roger was humming, something under his breath. He did that when he was relaxed, focused. The afternoon sun was warm through the canopy bubble. At 2:17 p.m., I noticed something off. Not a heat signature, an absence. For the previous hour, I'd been seeing the normal scatter of small mammals and birds, the background thermal noise of a living forest. Squirrels, rabbits, songbirds roosting in the canopy. But suddenly, over about a square kilometer, nothing. Just cool background. Like someone had drawn a circle on the map and erased everything inside it. Hey, I said over the intercom. I'm getting a dead zone here. No small signatures at all. Lindsay looked up from her tablet. Equipment glitch? I ran a quick diagnostic. System's green. Readings are fine outside this area, but right below us, it's like the forest just emptied out. Roger banked slightly to give me a better angle. Animals do that sometimes before a storm, he offered. Hunker down, reduce activity. But the sky was clear. No, weather moving in. And the pattern was too sharp, too defined. I'd seen natural variation before this, wasn't it? This was a boundary. Something had made every small living thing in that area shut down or leave. I was about to suggest we mark it and move on, when the thermal display flickered, and a new signature appeared at the edge of the dead zone. Large, bipedal, moving. I've got something, I said, and my voice sounded strange even to me. Southwest quadrant, approximately 400 meters from our position. Switching to zoom. I adjusted the focus, bringing the signature into sharper resolution. It was big, easily the size of a black bear, maybe larger. But the gait was wrong. Too upright. Too fluid. Bears lumber when they walk on two legs, awkward and unbalanced. This thing moved with purpose, with coordination. Stride length had to be at least 5 feet, maybe more, and it was carrying something. Roger, I said quietly, you need to see this. Both of you. He brought us into a tighter orbit, descending smoothly. 800 feet, 750. The figure below continued moving, unbothered by the helicopter noise, or maybe unaware. Through the thermal camera, I could see it clearly now, a tall humanoid form, something draped across its shoulder or chest. But that second shape, the carried object, showed no independent heat signature. It was there, blocking the creature's thermal output in places, but it wasn't generating its own heat. Lindsay leaned forward between the seats, staring at my display. What is that? I don't know, I said. And then, because someone had to say it. But I think it's carrying a person. Roger didn't respond immediately, just banked us into a lower circle, giving me the best angle possible. I switched to the optical camera, the stabilized zoom lens we used for visual confirmation of tricky identifications. The forest canopy was thick, but there were gaps, clearings. And as the figure moved through one of those openings, we got our first real look at it. That's when all three of us went silent, because what we were seeing didn't fit into any category we had. Human but not human, animal but not animal, something in between, or something else entirely, and it was very, very real. The optical camera has a 30 times zoom with digital stabilization. Military-grade optics originally designed for border surveillance. I'd used it hundreds of times to confirm species identification when thermal signatures were ambiguous, counting points on a buck's antlers, verifying the presence of cubs with a sow, that kind of work. The image quality was sharp enough to read a license plate from half a mile up. What I saw through that lens, I see every night when I close my eyes. The figure was moving through a gap in the canopy, crossing what looked like a dry creek bed. It was tall, I'd estimate 7.5 feet, maybe 8. The body was humanoid in structure, 2 legs, 2 arms, an upright torso, but the proportions were wrong in ways that made my stomach clench. The arms were too long, hanging past where the knees would be. The legs had that backward articulated joint you see in birds or dinosaurs, what looks like a backward knee but is actually an ankle, with the true knee joint much higher up the leg. And the shoulders, God, the shoulders. Something was protruding from them. At first, I thought it might be a cape or some kind of draped fabric, but as the figure moved, I could see the structures shift and fold with muscular control. Leathery, bat-like, wings, or at least wing-like appendages. They weren't spread, they were tucked close to the body, but even folded, they extended several feet on either side. The head was narrow, elongated. I couldn't make out facial features clearly through the dappled shadows, but the skull shape was wrong. A pronounced cranial ridge, maybe. Or a crest. The whole silhouette reminded me of something from a natural history museum. Prehistoric. Ancient. Are you recording this? Lindsay's voice was tight, controlled. Professional training overriding whatever she was feeling. Everything, I said. Thermal and optical both. Time-stamped. GPS coded. The figure paused at the creek bed, and for maybe 3 seconds, it stood perfectly still. That's when I got my clearest view of what it was carrying. A person. Adult-sized, wearing what looked like dark clothing, jeans, maybe a jacket. The body was draped across the creature's chest and shoulder, arms hanging limp. No movement, no heat signature on thermal. Either the person was already dead, or in such deep hypothermia that their core temperature had dropped below detectable range. My hands were shaking. I had to brace the tablet against my knee to keep the image steady. "We need to call this in," Lindsay said. "Right now. That's a possible abduction. Medical emergency. Someone could still be alive." Roger's voice came over the intercom, and it had an edge I'd never heard before. 1,200 flight hours together, and I'd never once heard him rattled. "What the hell am I looking at?" "I don't know," I said, because I didn't. Every identification protocol I'd ever learned, every reference image I'd memorized, every documented species in the eastern United States, none of it matched. But we're getting it on film. The creature started moving again, and the gait was mesmerizing in its wrongness. Not a lumbering walk, but a loping stride, fluid and efficient. It covered ground fast, I'd estimate 8, maybe 10 miles per hour through terrain that would slow a human to a crawl. The backward jointed legs functioned like springs, absorbing impact and propelling forward with minimal wasted motion. This thing was built for movement through dense forest. I tracked it for another 40 seconds as it moved southwest, parallel to the dry creek bed. The wings, I was sure now they were wings, or had been at some evolutionary point, stayed folded tight. The carried form didn't shift or struggle. At one point the creature's head turned, just slightly, and I thought I caught a gleam of something reflective. Eyes, maybe. But we were at 800 feet, and even with the zoom, some details were lost in the dappled light. Then it reached a section where the Atlantic white cedar grew thick, their dark canopies overlapping in an impenetrable ceiling, and it simply vanished. One moment I had it framed in the optical zoom, the next, there was just forest. No heat signature on thermal, no movement visible through the canopy gaps. Gone. "Did you lose it?" Roger asked. I widened the search pattern, scanning the area in expanding circles. It went under heavy canopy. I can't. Wait. I caught a flicker of heat, maybe 200 meters southwest of the last sighting, but it was faint, diffused. I might have something, but the signature's breaking up. Too much interference from the canopy. Roger brought us around in a wider orbit, dropping to 700 feet. We circled the area for another 6 minutes, searching. I had my face pressed close to the thermal display, trying to filter out the background noise, looking for any pattern of movement that matched what we'd just seen. Nothing. Lindsay was already on her phone, pulling up the state police emergency line. Her hands were steady, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. "We need to log the coordinates. Mark the exact location where we lost visual." I tagged the GPS point, 39.7342 degrees north, 74.589 1 degrees west, a spot in the forest that probably didn't have a name, 18 miles from the nearest road, in a section of the Pine Barrens where the only human access was by foot through terrain that would take hours to traverse. Roger's voice came through my headset, quiet and careful. "Tell me that was a person in a costume, some kind of elaborate hoax." I wanted to say yes. I wanted to offer him that explanation, that comfort. But I'd seen the thermal signature. I'd watched the biomechanics of movement. I'd observed details that couldn't be faked from 800 feet up with stabilized military-grade optics. "I don't think so," I said. We flew back to McGuire in silence. None of us spoke until we were on the ground, rotors winding down, the ordinary world reasserting itself around us. But we all knew. The moment the footage finished recording, the moment we marked those coordinates, everything had changed. We'd documented something that wasn't supposed to exist, and it had been carrying someone. We didn't shut down the cameras immediately after losing visual contact. Professional habit, maybe, or some instinct that told us to keep recording everything. For another 20 minutes we flew search patterns over the area, widening the grid, scanning every gap in the canopy. Roger brought us as low as 500 feet, in some places lower than we'd normally fly for a survey, low enough that I could make out individual tree trunks through the clearings. The forest looked normal, peaceful even. Afternoon sunlight filtering through the pine canopy, shadows lengthening as we approached 3 p.m. On thermal, I started picking up the background signatures again. Deer, a fox, small birds. Like whatever had cleared them out before had passed through, and they were cautiously returning. But we never saw the figure again. I kept the optical camera recording, panning slowly across the terrain, capturing frame after frame of Atlantic white cedar swamp and sandy clearings, looking for tracks, for disturbed vegetation, for any sign that what we'd seen had actually been there. At one point, I thought I caught something, a line of depressions in the sand near the creek bed, spaced too far apart to be human footprints. But the angle was wrong, and by the time Roger circled back for another pass, the shadows had shifted, and I couldn't find it again. "We need to mark this area and get back," Lindsay said finally. She'd been quiet during the search, just watching. But now her voice had that decisive edge that meant she'd finished processing and moved into action mode. "If there's someone down there who needs help, every minute matters." Roger nodded and banked us onto a heading back to McGuire. "You get clear frames?" 90 seconds of footage, I said. "Thermal and optical. Multiple angles. GPS tagged throughout. Good, because nobody's going to believe this otherwise." He was right about that. The flight back took 18 minutes. Nobody spoke. I kept the cameras running just in case, but we saw nothing unusual. Just the endless green of the pinelands scrolling past below us, innocent and empty. My hands had stopped shaking, but my mind was racing through what I'd seen, trying to catalog details, trying to make it make sense. The gait, the proportions, the wings, the carried form with no heat signature. I pulled up the thermal recording and started reviewing it, frame by frame. There, the moment the figure first appeared, at the edge of the dead zone, moving with that fluid, purposeful stride. I zoomed in as much as the resolution allowed. The heat signature was consistent with a large mammal, maybe 180 to 220 pounds based on the thermal output. But the distribution was wrong. Too much heat in the torso and limbs, not enough in the extremities. And those wing structures, they showed thermal activity, vascular flow. They were living tissue, not costume attachments. I switched to the optical footage, found the clearest frame when the figure was crossing the open creek bed, zoomed in until the pixels started breaking apart. The legs, those backward joints, they weren't just bent wrong, they were structured wrong. The musculature, the way the tendons moved under what looked like dark, leathery skin. This wasn't human anatomy, this wasn't bear anatomy, this wasn't anything I'd seen before, and the carried form. I could make out dark denim, definitely. A jacket or hoodie, dark-colored. One arm hanging. Down, pale skin, visible. Adult hand. The person was either unconscious or dead. No defensive posture, no attempt to resist or escape. How long had the creature been carrying them? Where was it taking them? "You seeing something?" Lindsay had turned in her seat to watch my screen. "Just trying to get the clearest possible image," I said. "For the report." She was quiet for a moment. "That was real. What we saw, that was real." "Yes. It looked like." She stopped, started again. The descriptions from 1909, the Jersey Devil sightings, bipedal wings, the wrong proportions. It looked like that. Roger's voice came through the headset. "Let's not jump to folklore. We document what we saw, we report it, we let the experts figure out what it was." But his voice had no conviction behind it, because we were the experts. This was what we did: identify species from the air, document wildlife. And what we just documented didn't fit into any category we knew. We landed at McGuire at 3:41 p.m. The ground crew was already securing the helicopter when Lindsay opened her door, phone in hand. "I'm calling state police. They need to get SAR teams out there immediately." I started downloading the footage to the primary server, but some instinct made me pause. I pulled out one of my personal backup SD cards. I always carried a couple for overflow storage and copied everything to it before anyone could stop me. The thermal files, the optical recording, the GPS logs, all of it. Then, I slipped the card into my jacket pocket. I don't know why I did that. Maybe I already sensed what was coming. Roger was watching me. Our eyes met for just a second. He gave the smallest nod, then turned away. By 4 p.m., we were sitting in the hangar conference room reviewing the footage on the main monitor. All three of us, watching in silence as the figure moved across the screen, watching it carry something that had once been a person. By 4:30, Lindsay had New Jersey State Police on the Figleys. By 6 p.m., they were launching a full search and rescue operation. And by 7 p.m., a man in civilian clothes with no visible badge was asking us very pointed questions about who else had seen the footage. The man arrived in an unmarked sedan just as the sun was setting. No introduction, no credentials offered. He wore khakis and a polo shirt, like he'd just come from a golf course. But the way he moved, economical, Observant said military or federal. He found us in the hangar where we'd been waiting, told us his name was Mr. Garrett, and asked if we could step into the conference room for a debrief. Not requested, asked. But the tone made it clear we didn't have a choice. Roger, Lindsay, and I sat on one side of the table. Garrett sat across from us, a thin laptop open in front of him. Behind him, through the window, I could see activity ramping up outside state police vehicles, a K-9 unit, what looked like park service trucks. The search operation Lindsay had triggered was mobilizing fast. I need to understand the timeline, Garrett said. He had the kind of voice that stayed level regardless of content. From the moment you first observed the anomaly to when you landed. Walk me through it. So we did. Roger covered the flight path and altitude changes. Lindsay described the species we'd been logging before the sighting. I went through the technical details, thermal signature characteristics, optical zoom settings, GPS coordinates, recording protocols. We took turns, each of us sticking to observable facts, avoiding interpretation. Garrett listened, without interrupting. Took no notes. Just watched us, with the kind of attention that felt like being X-rayed. When we finished, he was quiet for maybe 10 seconds. Then, the footage. Where is it currently stored? Primary server here at the facility, I said. Backed up to the contractor's secure cloud. Standard protocol for all survey data. Who has access to those systems? Me, Roger, our project manager, and IT. The contractor's data security team has administrative access. Has anyone outside that group seen the footage? I shook my head. So, we came straight here, after landing. Reviewed it once ourselves, then Lindsay called state police. Did you mention the nature of what you'd filmed in that call? Lindsay shifted in her seat. I reported a possible abduction or medical emergency. Large figure carrying what appeared to be an unresponsive person in a remote area of the Pinelands. I provided coordinates and requested immediate SAR response. But you didn't describe the figure in detail. No. Garrett nodded slowly. Good. That's good. He closed the laptop. Here's what's going to happen. The search and rescue operation is proceeding as planned. That's appropriate, given the circumstances. But the footage itself is being classified as incidental military surveillance, captured during operations adjacent to Joint Base McGuire. Posse Comitatus Act provisions apply. The data is not releasable to civilian authorities or media. Roger leaned forward. That's survey data, wildlife survey. Nothing military about it. Your contract is with Horizon Defense Analytics. They hold DoD contracts for base perimeter monitoring and training area oversight. Your equipment was purchased through defense procurement channels. The flight originated from a military installation. Legally, that makes this military-adjacent surveillance, and the classification is appropriate. For footage of a missing person, Lindsay's voice was rising. Someone could be dying out there, which is why SAR is being deployed immediately with the coordinates you provided. Garrett's tone didn't change, but the visual documentation remains classified pending review. This is standard protocol for any surveillance data that might compromise security or operational procedures. I felt something cold settle in my chest. You're saying we can't share what we saw. I'm saying the footage is government property and is classified. What you personally observed and can testify to remains your own experience. But the recordings, the data files, the technical documentation, those are restricted. He paused. Have any of you made personal copies of the files? The question hung in the air. The SD card in my jacket pocket suddenly felt like it weighed 10 pounds. No, Roger said. No, Lindsay said. No, I said. Garrett looked at each of us in turn. Good. Because unauthorized retention of classified surveillance data is a federal offense. I'm sure you understand. He stood up. You'll be contacted tomorrow about next steps. In the meantime, your helicopter is grounded pending a technical review. Equipment certification validation should take a few days. He moved toward the door, then paused. I appreciate your cooperation and your discretion. After he left, the three of us sat in silence. Through the window, we could see more vehicles arriving, floodlights being set up, the organized chaos of a major search operation gearing up for nightfall. They're going to bury this, Roger said quietly. Lindsay was staring at her hands. Someone's out there, dead or alive, someone's out there, and we're the only ones who know what took them. I thought about the figure on the screen. The carried form with no heat signature. The fluid, inhuman gait. The wings folded tight against that elongated torso. We'd documented something impossible, and now someone was making very sure nobody else would see it. That night, alone in a motel room 6 miles from the base, I pulled out the SD card and stared at it for a long time. Then I encrypted the files, uploaded them to a personal cloud account under a fake name, and hid the card in the lining of my equipment bag. I didn't know why yet, just knew I needed to. On my phone, the news was already breaking. Search underway for missing person in Pinelands wilderness. But the real story, what was actually out there in those calm woods, that story was being classified into silence. September 27th started with a phone call at 6:15 a.m. Roger, telling me the helicopter was officially grounded and we'd been invited to observe the search operation from the mobile command post near Batstow Village. The word invited had quotation marks you could hear. I met him and Lindsay in the parking lot at 7. None of us had slept much. Lindsay had dark circles under her eyes. Roger looked like he'd aged 5 years overnight. We drove out in Roger's truck, nobody talking, just listening to the local news coverage on the radio. Massive search operation underway in Pine Barrens. Authorities tight-lipped about details. Family members urged to come forward if anyone is missing. The command post was set up in a cleared area off Route 542, maybe 2 miles from the actual search grid. State police had established a perimeter with sawhorses and yellow tape. Beyond it, I could see the staging area SAR teams in bright vests checking gear, K9 units, park service vehicles, and at least 30 volunteers in civilian clothes holding clipboards and radios. A state police sergeant checked our IDs against a list, then waved us through to a trailer that served as the coordination center. Inside, a large topographic map of the Pinelands covered one wall, our GPS coordinates marked with a red pin. Search sectors were drawn in grease pencil, teams assigned to each grid square. We spent the morning standing in the back of that trailer, watching the operation unfold through radio chatter and position updates. Professional, methodical, thorough. Teams worked outward from the coordinates in expanding squares, calling in every 30 minutes. The K9 units went out first 3 dogs with experienced handlers. By 10:30, all 3 dogs had been pulled from the field. I heard the handler's voice over the radio, frustration bleeding through the professional tone. "Command, this is K9 Unit 2. My dog is refusing to bride. Track. Showing signs of extreme stress. Requesting permission to withdraw." Similar reports from the other 2 units. One dog had simply sat down and wouldn't move. Another was whining continuously, trying to pull back toward the vehicles. The incident commander, a state police lieutenant named Kowalski, looked at the K9 coordinator. "That normal?" "No, sir. These are experienced SAR dogs. I've never seen all 3 react like this simultaneously." Lindsay caught my eye, said nothing, didn't have to. At 11:47 a.m., Team 4 called in. They'd found something. The chatter in the command trailer stopped. Everyone listening as the team leader's voice came through. "Command, we have possible evidence. Requesting forensics and photography to our position." Coordinates were relayed. Kowalski turned to us. "That's close to your sighting location?" "Within 100 meters, I confirmed." "You're coming with me." We followed him out to a jeep, drove down a sand road that turned into barely a trail, then hiked the last quarter mile on foot. The forest was quiet. Too quiet, like Lindsay had described. No birds, no insects. Just our footsteps on sandy soil and the occasional crackle of radio traffic. The search team had established a perimeter around a clearing near a dry creek bed, the same creek bed where we'd seen the figure cross. Yellow evidence markers dotted the ground like strange flowers. A state police forensic tech was photographing something in the sand. He worked quickly, methodically, his camera clicking in rapid succession. Next to him, a park ranger stood with his arms crossed, looking uncomfortable. I stepped closer and saw what they'd found. A single sneaker. High-top style, men's size 10, relatively new. Sitting upright in the sand like someone had just stepped out of it. 10 feet away, strips of torn fabric, dark denim. Cotton, maybe from a shirt or jacket. Some of the pieces were stained with something brown that could have been mud or could have been something else. And between them, pressed deep into the sandy soil, a series of tracks, 3-toed. Each impression roughly 14 inches long and 7 inches wide at the widest point. The toes ended in what looked like claw marks, scored into the earth. The tracks were spaced 5 to 6 feet apart, following a clear line from the creek bed toward the cedar swamp. The forensic tech was photographing them from every angle, a scale ruler placed next to each print for reference. The depressions were deep, at least 4 inches into the compact sand. Whatever made them was heavy and moving with force. The park ranger cleared his throat. "Bear tracks," he said. His voice was too loud, too insistent. "Black bear, probably. Soil erosion distorts the print pattern, makes them look unusual." The forensic tech said nothing, just kept photographing. I stared at those tracks and remembered the figure moving across the clearing. The backward jointed legs, the fluid, loping gait, the wings, folded tight against its back. These weren't bear tracks, and everyone standing in that clearing knew it. The search expanded over the next 48 hours. More teams, wider grids, aerial support from state police helicopters. I watched most of it from the command trailer, where updates came in every half hour like a grim countdown to nothing. No body. No blood trail. No additional clothing. Just that single sneaker, the torn fabric, and tracks that the official reports were calling indeterminate, possibly bear. But it was the dogs that told the real story. On the afternoon of September 27th, they brought in fresh canine units from other counties, dogs that hadn't been spooked the first time. The handlers walked them to the evidence site, let them scent the fabric and sneaker. Standard procedure. The dogs should have picked up a trail immediately if there was one to find. Instead, every single dog refused to track past a certain point. Not just refused, showed active fear. One handler told me his German Shepherd, a 7-year veteran with dozens of successful searches, had never acted like this before. It's like he hits an invisible wall and just shuts down. I watched from a distance as they tried a 4th dog, a bloodhound with an exceptional track record. The handler walked her to the creek bed, gave her the scent article. She put her nose down, started following the trail toward the cedar swamp. Made it maybe 30 yards before she stopped, hackles raised, and began backing up, whining. The handler tried to coax her forward. The dog sat down and wouldn't budge. "Something's wrong with the scent," one of the handlers said during a break. He was drinking coffee outside the trailer, looking frustrated and exhausted. "Either there's a contaminant we're not detecting, or..." He trailed off, shook his head. "I don't know. I've been doing this for 12 years. Dogs don't act like this." By the evening of September 28th, the search grid had expanded to cover over 8 square miles. Ground teams had walked every accessible trail, checked every clearing, documented every piece of potential evidence. They'd found nothing else. No signs of struggle beyond the torn clothing. No blood, no drag marks, no indication of where the person, if there had been a person, had gone. At 7:15 p.m., Lieutenant Kowalski called a meeting in the command trailer. SAR team leaders, K-9 coordinators, Park Service representatives, and the 3 of us standing in the back. He looked tired. Defeated, maybe. "We're suspending active search operations as of 2,100 hours tonight," he said. "We'll maintain the area as an active investigation site, but without additional evidence or leads, there's nothing more we can do." One of the team leaders spoke up. "What about the tracks? The fabric with biological material? Forensics is processing everything, but preliminary assessment suggests the items may have been discarded by a transient or lost hiker sometime in the past few weeks. The tracks are consistent with wildlife, most likely black bear." Lindsay's voice cut through the room. Those tracks were fresh. The impressions were clean, well-defined, and they don't match any bear print morphology. Kowalski looked at her. "Dr. Huey, I understand your concerns, but without a missing person report, without any evidence of foul play or immediate distress, we can't justify continued resources on this scale." "What about what we saw from the helicopter?" Roger said. "A figure carrying something. That's not nothing. Your thermal imaging showed a heat signature. The optical footage was reviewed and deemed inconclusive due to canopy interference and distance." Kowalski's tone was careful, measured. "There's no definitive evidence of an abduction or medical emergency." I felt something cold spreading through my chest. The footage hadn't been inconclusive. We'd seen it in high definition, multiple angles, 90 seconds of clear documentation. Someone had decided it was inconclusive. "So that's it?" I said. "We just close the case?" "The case remains open. If new evidence emerges, or if someone files a missing person report, we'll resume immediately." He paused. "But right now, we have nothing." The meeting broke up shortly after. Teams began packing equipment, breaking down the command post. By 9 p.m., the clearing that had been full of vehicles and activity was nearly empty. We were told to report to the contractor's office the following morning. Administrative matters, the email said. Regarding your current assignment. Roger drove us back in silence. When he dropped me at the motel, he sat for a moment with the engine running. They're shutting this down, he said finally. Not just the search, all of it. Yeah, I said. I know. Lindsay turned from the passenger seat. What do we do? I didn't have an answer for her. That night, I watched the local news. The story had already shifted. Search operation concludes with no evidence of missing person. Authorities suggest possible false alarm. No mention of the footage. No mention of the tracks. No mention of 3 experienced professionals who documented something impossible. Just silence, spreading like a stain. The contractor meeting happened at 9 a.m. On September 30th, in a windowless conference room at the Horizon Defense Analytics office in Trenton, Mr. Garrett was there, along with a woman who introduced herself as Rachel from HR and a man in a suit who never gave his name at all. They offered us contract buyouts, generous ones. 6 months' pay, immediate reassignment to premium contracts in other regions. Roger could go to Alaska, higher rates, better per diem. Lindsay had a USGS opportunity in Colorado waiting for her approval. I had my choice of Montana, Wyoming, or Washington State. We're repositioning resources, Rachel said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Expanding operations. This is actually a great opportunity for all. Nobody mentioned the footage. Nobody mentioned the search operation. Nobody said the words Jersey Devil or Pine Barrens or classified, but the message was clear. Accept the reassignments, move away, stay quiet. What if we decline? Roger asked. Rachel's smile didn't waver. That's certainly your choice. Though I should mention that the current contract period ends October 15th, and we're not planning to renew this particular survey project. So we're out of work either way. You're being offered preferential placement in high-value contracts. Most contractors would consider that a positive outcome. The man in the suit, the one who hadn't introduced himself, spoke for the first time. You should also know that the September 26th incident is part of an ongoing security review. Any public statements or media contact regarding that flight would complicate that review significantly, and potentially expose you to legal liability. There it was. Not quite a threat, not quite a warning. Just a statement of fact delivered in a tone that made the implications clear. We didn't sign anything that day. Told them we needed time to consider. But walking out of that office, I could feel the vice tightening. Roger was the first to break. 2 weeks later, he called me from Anchorage. He'd taken the Alaska contract. Better money, he said. Clean start. His voice sounded hollow. I can't do this, he said. I can't keep thinking about it. What we saw, what's out there. I need to work, man. I need to fly and not think about it. I understand, I said. And I did. You still have the backup? He asked quietly. Yeah. Long pause. Good. Just be careful. He stopped returning my calls after that. Lindsay held out longer. We met for coffee in early October, both of us still technically employed, but with no flights scheduled, no work assignments, nothing but waiting. She looked exhausted. Haunted. I've been going through old fish and wildlife reports, she said. Archive data from the Pinelands going back to the 1,950 seconds. There are anomalies. Sightings that were reclassified, evidence that was lost, cases that were closed without explanation. They've been covering it up for decades, I said, or ignoring it, or genuinely not knowing what to do with information that doesn't fit into any known category. She stirred her coffee without drinking it. I found a report from 1973, a hunter near the Mullica River who disappeared in late September. His truck was found locked, rifle still inside. Search operation lasted 4 days, found nothing. Closed as probable drowning, even though there was no body and the nearest deep water was 3 miles away. How many others? At least 6 that I can document. Probably more that were never officially reported or were attributed to other causes. She looked up at me. This thing, whatever it is, has been out there for a long time, taking people, and nobody wants to acknowledge it. I told her about. Timothy Vogt then. The 2015 case I'd found in my own research. The pattern that was emerging. September, October, always near water. Always in the deepest parts of the Pinelands. We should compile everything, Lindsay said. Document the pattern. Submit it to... She stopped. Who? Who do we submit it to? The state? They just shut down the search. The federal government? They classified our footage. Academic journals? They'd laugh us out of the room. So what do we do? She was quiet for a long time. Then, I'm taking the Colorado position. I have to. I have student loans, a mortgage. I can't lose everything over this. I know, but I'm keeping my notes. Everything I found. And if you ever decide to go public with it, if you ever find a way to make people listen, she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Call me. I'll back you up. No matter what it costs. 2 weeks later, she was gone. And I was alone with the footage, the pattern, and the growing certainty that more people were going to disappear while I did nothing. Mid-October, my contract was officially terminated. Performance concerns was the phrase they used in the letter. New specifics, new documentation, just a generic severance package, and a reminder that I'd signed confidentiality agreements regarding proprietary technology and operational procedures. I'd refused the Montana reassignment 3 times. After the 3rd refusal, they stopped asking. The paranoia started small. A black SUV parked across from my apartment complex for 3 consecutive nights. Same vehicle, different parking spots, but always with a clear line of sight to my door. Tinted windows. No one ever got out. On the 4th night, it was gone. Could have been nothing. Could have been a coincidence. Then came the IRS audit notice. Random selection, the letter said. I'd been filing the same straightforward 1040 easy for 8 years without issue, but suddenly they needed to review everything. 3 years. Of records. Documentation for every deduction. Bank statements. Credit card records. I hired a tax attorney. She said it was unusually aggressive for someone in my income bracket. The real turning point came on October 19th. I was in my apartment reviewing the footage again, something I did most nights, obsessively analyzing every frame, looking for details I might have missed. 2 men knocked on my door at 7 p.m. They had FAA identification badges and said they were conducting a routine compliance review of aerial survey operations. We need to ask you some questions about data handling procedures, the older one said. His badge said his name was Morrison, specifically regarding backup protocols and personal data retention. They didn't ask to come in. We stood in my doorway while they asked increasingly specific questions about the September 26th flight. What equipment had I used? Where were files typically stored? Had I made any personal copies of survey data? Had I shared any operational footage with outside parties? I answered carefully. Truthfully, mostly. Yes, I'd operated the thermal and optical cameras. No, I hadn't shared footage with anyone. I didn't mention the encrypted SD card currently buried in my sock drawer. We're just verifying that all classified surveillance data remains properly secured, Morrison said. You understand that unauthorized retention of such materials would be a serious federal violation. I understand. And you're aware that your security clearance, even though the contract has ended, remains active until the classification review is complete. I hadn't known that. Yes, I said. Anyway. They left after 20 minutes, but the message had been delivered. We know what you might have. We're watching. That night, I couldn't sleep. Lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, running through scenarios. If they knew I had a backup, they would have taken it. They were fishing, hoping I'd volunteer information or make a mistake, but the visit itself meant something. Meant they were worried enough about potential leaks to apply pressure. It also meant they couldn't prove anything. The breaking point came 3 nights later. I woke at 2:30 a.m. to the sound of someone trying my apartment door. Not knocking, testing the lock. I heard the handle turn slowly, then stop. Footsteps in the hallway. Silence. I sat in the dark with my back against the wall until dawn, listening. Nothing happened. No one broke in. No threats were made. But I'd gotten the message loud and clear. We can reach you whenever we want. On October 25th, I started packing. Told my landlord I was breaking the lease, forfeited the deposit. Sold most of my furniture, put the rest in storage. Boxed up my equipment, my files, everything that mattered. The encrypted footage I copied to 3 separate USB drives, stored in 3 different locations. Lindsay called that night. "Are you okay?" Roger called me, said he's worried about you. "I'm fine, just moving." "Moving where?" "West. Haven't decided exactly where yet." Long pause. "They got to you too." "Nobody got to me. I just need a change of scenery." "Listen to me." Her voice dropped. "Let it go. Whatever you're thinking about doing with that footage, with the investigation, just let it go. These people, whoever they are, they have resources. We don't. They can make your life very difficult. Someone's out there, Lindsay. That thing is still out there, and people are going to keep disappearing. And what are you going to do about it? Go public? They'll discredit you in 24 hours. Release the footage? They'll call it a hoax or suppress it with legal injunctions. You'll destroy your life for nothing. So I just forget? Pretend it didn't happen? I'm not saying forget. I'm saying survive. Stay alive. Stay employed. And maybe, someday, when the circumstances are different." She didn't finish the thought. "Take care of yourself," I said finally. "You too, please." I left New Jersey on October 28th, 2019, 3 a.m., before the sun came up. Drove west on I-80 with everything I owned in the back of my truck and no particular destination in mind. In my glove box, wrapped in a Faraday bag to block any tracking signals, was a USB drive containing 90 seconds of footage that proved something impossible was real. I didn't know what I was going to do with it yet. I just knew I couldn't let it disappear into classified silence. Not while that thing was still out there. Still hunting. I spent the next 4 years trying to disappear into normal life. Took a job flying survey missions for a forestry service in Oregon. Then a pipeline monitoring contract in Idaho. Eventually landed with a mining company in Nevada doing aerial photography of dig sites. Nothing glamorous. Nothing that required security clearances or government contracts. Just work that kept me in the air and paid enough to live on. I moved 6 times in those 4 years. Portland, Boise, Reno, a small town outside of Spokane whose name I barely remember. Never stayed anywhere longer than 8 months. Told myself it was for the work, following the contracts. But really, I was running from the memory and the fear that someone was still watching. The nightmares came in waves. Sometimes I'd go weeks without them. Then I'd dream about the figure moving through the forest, and the carried form would turn its head toward me, a face I could never quite see, but that filled me with a dread so profound I'd wake up gasping. Other times, I'd dream I was on the ground in the pinelands, and something with wings was circling overhead, just beyond the canopy, waiting. I stopped camping. Stopped hiking alone. When contracts took me into remote areas, I made sure I was back to civilization before sunset. My coworkers probably thought I was paranoid or soft. I didn't care. I never deleted the footage. Checked it every few months to make sure the files were intact, the encryption holding. Sometimes I'd watch it again, frame by frame, looking for answers I never found. What was it? Where did it come from? How many were there? But mostly, I tried not to think about it. Tried to build something like a normal life. It didn't work. Relationships failed because I couldn't explain the hypervigilance, the sudden need to move, the parts of my past I refused to discuss. Friends drifted away when they realized I was never fully present, always holding something back. I existed, but I wasn't really living. Just moving through the motions, carrying weight I couldn't put down. Everything changed in late October 2023. I was living outside of Bend, Oregon, in a rented cabin with decent internet and a view of nothing but pine trees. On my days off, I'd gotten into the habit of listening to true crime podcasts. Something about other people's mysteries felt safer than thinking about my own. One evening, I was halfway through an episode about cold cases in the Northeast when the host started discussing a disappearance in New Jersey. Timothy Vogt, September 2015. Last seen near the Mullica River in the Pine Barrens. I stopped what I was doing, turned the volume up. The host walked through the case details. Vogt was an experienced hiker, 34 years old, had gone into the Pinelands on a day hike and never came back. His truck was found locked in a trailhead parking area, his phone and wallet inside. Search teams found no trace of him. No blood, no signs of struggle, no body. Just, what makes this case particularly interesting, the host said. is that it's part of a larger pattern. Between 2015 and 2023, at least 6 people have vanished in the same general area of the Pine Barrens, all in late September or early October, all near water sources, and all without any significant evidence of what happened to them. She listed the names, dates, locations. My hands were shaking. One case in particular made my blood go cold. Carl Dennison, bow hunter, disappeared September 2022. Last known location, approximately 3 miles from the coordinates where we'd filmed the creature. His truck was found locked, his bow still in the cab. No hunter abandons their weapon voluntarily. Search teams found his tree stand, but no other trace. And just like Vote, his trail camera's SD card was missing. I paused the podcast, sat in silence for a long time. The creature was still there, still active, still taking people. And I'd spent 4 years running away while it happened. The host continued. Authorities have attributed most of these disappearances to accidental deaths, drowning, exposure, getting lost in the wilderness. But family members and amateur investigators have noted the pattern is too consistent to be coincidence. Something strange is happening in that section of the Pinelands, and no one seems willing to investigate seriously. She was right, and I knew why, because the truth was classified, buried, hidden under layers of bureaucratic denial and institutional pressure to maintain the comfortable fiction that nothing unexplained exists in our mapped and monitored world. I opened my laptop and started searching for everything I could find about the missing persons. Built a spreadsheet. Dates, locations, circumstances, any evidence recovered. The pattern was undeniable once you saw it. Every 7 to 9 years, going back decades, with clusters in between. Always autumn, always near water, always without resolution. It took me 2 weeks to make the decision. I couldn't release the footage that would get me arrested and accomplish nothing. But I could tell the story, document what I'd seen, connect it to the pattern, warn people about what was out there. On November 12th, 2023, I started recording. I'm going to walk you through what the footage actually shows. Not speculation, not folklore, just technical analysis of what we documented on September 26th, 2019. From 800 feet up, with military-grade thermal and optical imaging equipment. If you're listening to this hoping for a ghost story, you're going to be disappointed. What we captured wasn't supernatural. It was biological, physical, real. The thermal signature first. When something appears on a FLIR camera, it shows up based on heat differential. Warmer objects glow white against cooler backgrounds. Mammals typically register between 96 and 102 degrees Fahrenheit at the surface, with variation based on size, activity level, and environmental conditions. The figure we tracked showed a consistent thermal output of approximately 98 degrees. That's within normal mammalian range. But the heat distribution was unusual. Most of the thermal activity concentrated in the torso and upper limbs, with significantly less in the extremities. The wing structures, and I'm certain now they were wings, showed vascular heat patterns consistent with living tissue, blood flow, active circulation. This wasn't a costume or a hoax. You can't fake thermal signatures at that distance. The physics don't work. The gait analysis is what convinced me this was something genuinely unknown. I've watched the footage hundreds of times, measured the stride length, analyzed the biomechanics. The figure covered ground at approximately 8 to 10 miles per hour through terrain that would slow a human to maybe 2 or 3 miles per hour. The backward jointed legs functioned as natural shock absorbers and spring mechanisms similar to digitigrade locomotion in birds or certain dinosaurs. Each stride was 5 to 6 feet long. The foot placement was precise, avoiding obstacles, choosing the most efficient path through dense underbrush. This wasn't stumbling or shambling. This was an organism perfectly adapted to its environment. The morphology, standing height approximately 7.5 to 8 feet, arm span with wings extended, I'd estimate 12 to 14 feet based on the folded wingspan we observed. The skull was elongated, possibly suggesting either enhanced olfactory capabilities or different brain structure than modern humans. I couldn't make out facial features clearly through the canopy shadows, but the overall profile was humanoid, bipedal, upright posture, forward-facing eyes based on head position. Now, the carried object. This is the part that still keeps me awake. On thermal, it showed no independent heat signature. That means one of two things. Either it was already deceased and had cooled to ambient temperature, or it was in such severe hypothermia that core temperature had dropped below the camera's detection threshold. Given that the air temperature that day was approximately 64 degrees Fahrenheit, and a deceased body takes several hours to cool completely, I believe we were looking at someone who had been dead for at least 2 to 3 hours, or something in deep shock, though that seems less likely given the complete absence of movement. The clothing was visible in the optical footage: dark denim, possibly jeans, dark jacket or hoodie, one arm hanging down, adult-sized hand visible, Caucasian skin tone based on what we could see. No defensive posturing, no struggle, just dead weight being carried with efficiency. I've considered every alternative explanation over the past 5 years. Extensively. Hoax? Impossible. We were at 800 feet altitude with stabilized optics. You can't stage a hoax that sophisticated in terrain that remote with thermal and optical cameras capturing simultaneous footage from that distance. The technical requirements alone would be beyond what any civilian hoaxer could accomplish. Misidentified bear? Black bears can walk bipedally for short distances, but their gait is awkward, lurching. They don't maintain upright posture for extended movement, and they certainly don't have wing-like structures or backward-jointed legs. The morphology doesn't match, not even close. Experimental drone or military asset? I considered this seriously. But drones generate thermal signatures from motors and electronics that look completely different from biological heat. No rotor noise was audible even at our altitude. And why would any experimental aircraft be carrying what appeared to be a human body through remote wilderness? Human in costume carrying a mannequin? Again, the thermal signature was wrong for that. Costumes create heat trapping that shows distinct patterns, and the biomechanics, the stride length, the speed, the efficiency of movement, those can't be faked by someone in a suit. I've run through every rational explanation I can construct. None of them fit the evidence. What we documented was an unknown biological entity. A cryptid, if you want to use that term, though I prefer unclassified species. Something that has adapted to survive in one of the last large wilderness areas of the eastern United States. Something intelligent enough to avoid detection, powerful enough to take adult humans, and apparently organized enough to remove evidence like trail camera SD cards. I need to talk about the Jersey Devil. Not as folklore, not as a campfire story, but as potentially the oldest documentation we have of what's actually living in the Pine Barrens. The 1909 panic is well-documented historical fact. Between January 16th and 23rd of that year, over 1,000 people across South Jersey and Philadelphia reported seeing something they couldn't explain. Not just rural farmers or drunk loggers, police officers, postal workers, trolley operators, factory supervisors. Credible witnesses with nothing to gain from lying. The descriptions were remarkably consistent. A creature approximately 6 to 8 feet tall, walking upright on 2 legs. Bat-like wings spanning 12 to 15 feet. A horse-like or elongated head. Hoofed or clawed feet accounts vary, but many specifically mention 3-toed prints. Glowing red eyes. A harsh, piercing cry, unlike any known animal. Schools closed. Factories shut down for days. Armed posses went out hunting for it. The Philadelphia Zoo offered a $10,000 reward for its capture that's roughly $300,000 in today's money. This wasn't a minor local legend. This was mass panic across multiple municipalities. Then on January 23rd, it stopped. Just ended. No more sightings. No creature captured or killed. No explanation. And within months, the newspapers were calling it mass hysteria, a hoax, mistaken identity of sand cranes or other common animals. But here's what interests me. When you map the 1,909 sightings, most of them cluster around the edges of the Pine Barrens: Haddonfield, Gloucester, Bristol, Camden. The creature was seen in towns, but the sightings formed a rough perimeter around the deepest, most remote sections of the Pinelands, the same areas where people disappear now. It was pushed out of its territory, I think. January 1909 was unusually cold and dry. Forest fires had burned large sections of the Condex. Pinelands the previous summer. Maybe food was scarce. Maybe the creature or creatures were forced to range further than normal, bringing them into contact with human settlements. And what we filmed in 2019? The morphology matches those 1,909 descriptions almost exactly. Bipedal, winged, wrong proportions for human anatomy, three-toed tracks. But the Jersey Devil legend goes back much further than 1909. The Lenape people, the indigenous inhabitants of this region before European colonization, had oral traditions about them seeing a forest spirit or creature associated with the cedar swamps and deep wilderness. Descriptions are fragmentary, filtered through colonial interpreters who didn't really understand what they were hearing. But the consistent elements are: avoids humans, lives in the deepest wetlands, associated with death and disappearances. Not a demon, not a supernatural entity, just something dangerous that lives in places humans rarely go. The colonial-era Jersey Devil legend, the one about Mother Leeds giving birth to a 13th child that transformed into a monster that's almost certainly folklore built around something real, a way to explain encounters with a creature that didn't fit into European frameworks of natural history. People see something they can't categorize, so they create a story that makes it supernatural rather than biological. But what if it was always biological? What if there's a small, relict population of something that's been living in the Pine Barrens for centuries, maybe thousands of years? The Pinelands are uniquely suited to hiding a large predator. 1.1 million acres of protected wilderness, most of it inaccessible except on foot. Acidic soil that inhibits decomposition and makes scent tracking difficult. Cedar swamps where visibility is measured in feet, not yards. Water sources throughout, supporting prey populations, and a human population that's been conditioned for generations to avoid the interior. The locals don't go certain places, don't ask certain questions. Official authorities dismiss sightings as folklore. Search and rescue operations close cases without resolution. It's the perfect environment for something to remain hidden. The pattern of disappearances supports this. I've documented cases going back to 1952, but I'd bet money there are earlier ones if you dig through historical records. Every 7 to 9 years, there's a cluster. Late September through October, always near water, always in the deepest sections of the barrens. That timing suggests a behavioral pattern. Maybe breeding season, when the creatures are more active and need more food. Maybe migration, if there are multiple populations that move through the area seasonally. Maybe it's tied to prey, animal cycles, deer, bear, whatever else they normally eat, and humans are opportunistic targets when other food is scarce. The missing trail camera SD cards particularly interest me. Timothy Vogt in 2015, Carl Dennison in 2022 both had trail cameras set up. Both SD cards disappeared. That suggests either the creatures recognize recording equipment as a threat and remove it, or someone else is actively suppressing evidence. I lean toward the former. We're not dealing with a mindless predator. We're dealing with something intelligent enough to understand observation, to modify its behavior based on human presence, to avoid detection for centuries. The 1909 panic happened because the creature left its territory and entered human spaces. Once it retreated back into the deep pinelands, the sightings stopped. It learned, adapted, returned to the survival strategy that had kept it hidden. Avoid humans, stay deep in the wilderness, hunt only when the odds of discovery are minimal. But every few years, in autumn, when something drives it to range further or take risks, that's when people disappear. And we keep calling it folklore because the alternative is too uncomfortable to accept. That's something we can't classify, can't control, still lives in the last wild places, still hunts, still takes prey, and we're on the menu. After I heard that podcast in 2023, I couldn't just sit on the information anymore. I started reaching out carefully, quietly, trying to find people who might know something without exposing myself. In March 2021, I contacted a retired New Jersey State Police detective named Frank Caruso, who'd worked the Timothy Vogt case. I found his name in archived news articles about the search operation. It took me 2 weeks to track down his number. I called him posing as a freelance journalist researching cold cases in the Pine Barrens. He was hesitant at first. Retired guys usually are. They don't want to revisit failures or speak out of turn about department business. But something in my questions must have struck a chord because after about 10 minutes of careful conversation, his tone shifted. "You want to know what we really found out there?" he said. "Or what made it into the Crossed? Official report?" "Both," I said. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Off the record. Completely off the record. You don't use my name. You don't cite state police as a source. Agreed. We found tracks, he said. Not boot prints, not animal tracks that made any sense. Three-toed impressions in sandy soil near a dried creek bed, pressed deep like whatever made them was heavy and moving fast. Spacing was wrong for human stride. Morphology didn't match bear, deer, anything in our reference guides. What did the report say? Inconclusive wildlife activity. Maybe bear, maybe erosion patterns. He laughed bitterly. We measured those prints, photographed them from every angle. They weren't eroded. They were fresh, clear, and completely unexplainable. What else? The dogs wouldn't track. 3 different K9 units, all experienced SAR animals, and not one of them would follow the scent past a certain point, just shut down, showed stress behaviors. I've worked with dogs my whole career, never seen that happen. Any blood? Signs of struggle? That's the strangest part. We found his day pack about 40 yards from where the truck was parked. Contents were undisturbed: water bottle, energy bars, map, first aid kit, like he'd just set it down. But the pack itself had these marks on the straps. Not tears, not cuts, punctures. 3 of them, evenly spaced, like something with claws had grabbed it. I was writing everything down. The official conclusion was what? He got lost and died of exposure? Probable accidental death due to environmental factors? Body not recovered? But I'll tell you what I told my lieutenant at the time. Something took vote. Something grabbed him fast enough that he didn't have time to radio for help or make any defensive moves. And whatever it was, it didn't leave a blood trail because it carried him out clean. Did anyone believe you? My partner did. We both knew the official story was bullshit. But what were we supposed to put in the report? Unknown predator abducted the victim? They'd have laughed us off the force. Do you think it's still out there? Long pause. I think whatever's in those woods has been there a long time. And I think it's a lot better at surviving than we are at finding it. He asked me not to call again. Said he'd told me more than he should have and that some things were better left buried. Before he hung up, though, he said something that stuck with me. If you're planning to go out there looking for answers, don't. Whatever it is, it doesn't want to be found. And the people who do find it don't come back. I started monitoring missing persons databases after that. Set up keyword alerts for the Pine Barrens, Mullica River, Burlington County wilderness areas. Checked hunting and hiking forums for unusual reports. The patterns were there if you knew how to look. A bow hunter, in 2018, posted on a forum about being watched from the trees during an evening hunt near Batstow. Described feeling overwhelming dread, hearing something large moving through the canopy above him. He'd abandoned his tree stand and gear, literally ran back to his truck. The other forum members mocked him, called him paranoid. He never posted again. A backpacker in 2020 reported hearing wings, massive wings, beating overhead at dusk near Apple Pie Hill. Said it sounded like a hang glider or ultralight aircraft, but there were no engines, no human voices, just the sound of something huge flying low over the canopy. Trail cameras capturing blurred shapes moving too fast for the frame rate. Strange 3-toed tracks found and photographed, then dismissed as misidentified turkey or heron prints, even though the depth and spacing were all wrong. Piece by piece, the evidence was there, but scattered, dismissed, explained away by people who needed the world to make sense in familiar terms. I realized I wasn't the only one who'd seen something. I was just one of the few who'd captured proof, and that proof was classified, buried, hidden away where it couldn't disturb the comfortable lie that we know everything that lives in our forests. In August 2021, I made a mistake. I started asking questions too openly. I'd been careful for almost 2 years using VPNs, burner email addresses, never mentioning my real connection to the 2019 incident. But I got sloppy. Posted in a cryptozoology forum asking if anyone had footage or documentation of Jersey Devil sightings, specifically thermal imaging or trail camera evidence. Mentioned I was gathering data for a comprehensive analysis. 2 weeks later, I got another IRS audit notice. Second one in 3 years. My tax attorney was blunt. This isn't normal. Someone's using the IRS as harassment. You piss off a federal employee? Get involved in something politically sensitive? Not that I know of, I lied. The audit dragged on for months. Cost me thousands in legal fees. Found nothing wrong with my taxes, of course, because there was nothing wrong with them. But that wasn't the point. The point was the message. We're still watching, and we can make your life difficult. Then, in November 2021, someone broke into my storage unit in Reno. Not the main living space. I was renting the storage facility where I kept my old field equipment, boxes of files, backup hard drives from previous contracts. The facility manager called me at 6 a.m. "Your unit was accessed last night. Lock was cut. Thought you should know before the police get here." I drove over immediately. The police were already there, taking photos, dusting for prints. My unit was at the end of a row, away from the main cameras. Convenient. The strange thing was what they'd taken, or rather, what they hadn't taken. My old computer monitors, untouched. External hard drives from forestry contracts, untouched. Box of tools worth maybe $300, untouched. But my field notebooks from 2018 to 2019, gone. My old tablet that I'd used for flight, logging, gone. The backup portable hard drive where I'd stored thermal imaging files from various contracts, gone. Weird burglary, the cop said. Usually, they take the valuable stuff, electronics, tools. This looks more like someone was searching for something specific. Yeah, I said. Weird. The encrypted USB drives with the September 2019 footage weren't there. I'd never been stupid enough to keep them in a storage unit, but someone was looking for them. Someone knew I might have backups, and they were trying to recover every possible copy. The storage facility had camera footage, but the angle was bad and the lighting worse. All you could see was a figure in dark clothing and a baseball cap. Could have been anyone. 3 days later, I got a voicemail. Unknown number, no caller ID. A man's voice, calm and professional. "Mr. Hayes, this is a courtesy call. Some things remain classified for public safety reasons. Continued investigation into restricted matters can complicate your call, security clearance status, and create liability concerns. We hope you understand." They'd used my real name. They knew exactly who I was and what I'd been doing. I didn't sleep for 2 days. Kept the lights on, checked the locks every hour, jumped at every sound in the hallway. Eventually I realized I couldn't live like that. Couldn't spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder, wondering when the next warning would come. So I stopped. Stopped asking questions. Stopped monitoring forums. Stopped researching disappearances. Just went to work, kept my head down, and tried to pretend the footage buried in 3 separate secure locations didn't exist. That's when I started drinking more than I should have. Nothing dramatic, no rock bottom moment, no intervention. Just a slow slide into using alcohol to quiet the part of my brain that kept replaying the footage, kept thinking about the people who disappeared, kept calculating how many more would vanish while I stayed silent. A relationship in Spokane fell apart because I couldn't explain why I woke up at 3 a.m. in a cold sweat, checking the windows. Another one in Reno ended when she asked me what I was running from, and I realized I couldn't tell her the truth without sounding insane. My work stayed solid. I never flew drunk, never compromised safety. But everything else slowly degraded. Friends became acquaintances. Hobbies felt pointless. I was going through the motions of life without actually participating in it. The weight of the secret was crushing me, but the fear of what would happen if I spoke up was worse. This is why I'm releasing this testimony anonymously. Why I won't provide the raw footage or reveal my current location. Not because I'm a coward, though maybe I am, but because I genuinely believe that full disclosure would cause more harm than good. If I released the footage publicly, what would happen? Best case, it goes viral for a week, gets debunked by experts who've never seen the full technical analysis, and I become a laughingstock while accomplishing nothing. Worst case, it triggers a military response or amateur hunting expeditions that get people killed and likely fail to capture the creature anyway. The Pine Barrens are protected wilderness for a reason. They're a fragile ecosystem home to dozens of endangered species. A full-scale hunting operation would destroy habitat, harm countless animals, and probably drive the creature deeper into hiding without resolving anything. But staying silent means more disappearances, more families without answers, more people walking into those woods unaware of what's actually out there. So this is my compromise. An audio testimony. Documentation of the pattern. A warning to anyone who'll listen. I still have the footage. It's encrypted, stored in multiple locations, set to auto-release to several news outlets and cryptozoology researchers if anything happens to me. Dead man switch, essentially. If I die or disappear, the truth comes out. That's my insurance policy. The only thing keeping me alive, maybe. Or maybe I'm paranoid. Maybe the storage unit break-in was random. Maybe the voicemail was a prank. Maybe the IRS audits were a coincidence, but I don't think so. I think someone very powerful wants this buried. And I think they've decided I'm not quite enough of a threat to eliminate, as long as I keep quiet. This recording might change that calculation. I'm aware of the risk, but I can't carry this alone anymore. Can't watch the news reports of missing hikers and bow hunters and know what probably happened to them while saying nothing. If you're listening to this, and you know someone who went missing in the Pine Barrens, especially in autumn, especially near water, there's a chance you finally have an answer. Not the answer you wanted, not one that brings them back or makes sense of the loss, but an answer nonetheless. And if you're planning to go out there yourself, please listen to what I'm about to tell you. The disappearances haven't stopped. That's what you need to understand. This isn't a historical mystery or a cold case from decades past. This is ongoing. 2 more people vanished in the Pine Barrens in September 2024. A wildlife photographer named David Marsh, last seen near the Mullica River on September 19th. His camera was found at the base of a tree, battery dead, memory card removed. And a woman named Jennifer Holt, an experienced outdoors guide, disappeared October 3rd while leading a small group hike. Her group said she went ahead to scout the trail and never came back. Search teams found her backpack 2 days later, unopened, sitting in the middle of a game trail, like she'd simply set it down and walked away. Both cases officially remain open with no leads. Both fit the pattern exactly. I believe the creature or creatures, I don't know if there's one or several, operates on a seasonal pattern. Something about late September through early October triggers increased activity. Maybe it's migration, moving through the area on a regular route. Maybe it's breeding behavior, territorial disputes, or resource scarcity that drives them to take riskier prey. I don't know the mechanism. I just know the pattern repeats. And I know the pinelands are perfectly designed to hide this. 1 million acres of wilderness where decomposition happens fast in acidic soil, where scent trails break down quickly, where the interior is so dense and featureless that search and rescue teams can pass within 50 feet of something and never see it, where the local population has been conditioned for generations to avoid certain areas and not ask certain questions. If you're planning to go into the Pine Barrens, especially the deep interior near the Mullica River Basin, the Batstow area, or the cedar swamps, I'm begging you, take this seriously. Don't go alone, ever. Travel in groups of 4 minimum. The disappearances I've documented are all solo hikers or people who separated from their groups. Don't go at dusk or after dark. Every documented encounter, every unsettling incident I've found, happens in low light conditions. Dawn and dusk especially. Whatever this thing is, it seems to be crepuscular or nocturnal. Carry emergency beacons, not just cell phones. Service is spotty or non-existent in most of the interior. A satellite emergency beacon could save your life. If you hear wings, massive wings beating overhead, don't investigate. Don't try to film it. Get back to your vehicle or to open areas immediately. Move quickly, but don't run blindly. Running triggers predator response in most animals. If you find 3-toed tracks, especially if they're deep and widely spaced, report them to authorities even if you think they'll dismiss it. Document them with photographs, include something for scale, mark the GPS coordinates. The more documentation that exists, the harder it becomes to suppress. Trust your instincts. If an area feels wrong, if you get that primitive fear response, if wildlife goes silent around you, leave. Don't rationalize it away. Don't convince yourself you're being paranoid. That feeling exists for a reason. The question that haunts me most is this: was the figure I filmed on September 26, 2019, carrying a fresh victim, or retrieving something it had cached earlier? The lack of thermal signature suggests the person had been dead for hours. But the creature was moving with purpose, heading southwest deeper into the wilderness. Was it taking the body to a den? To feed young? To a location where it stores kills? I don't know. And that uncertainty is almost worse than knowing. Because if these are predation events, how many others over the decades have been misattributed to exposure, drowning, getting lost, or foul play? How many missing persons cases in the Pine Barrens and surrounding wilderness areas are actually this? The 1,909 panic documented over 1,000 sightings in 1 week. What if that wasn't an isolated incident? but just the only time the creature's presence became so obvious that it couldn't be ignored? What if it's been there all along, taking people quietly, rarely enough that each disappearance seems like an isolated tragedy rather than part of a pattern? I've given you the pattern now. The dates, the locations, the common elements. I've documented what I saw and connected it to historical accounts and ongoing disappearances. What you do with this information is up to you. I know some of you won't believe me. You'll call this creative fiction, a hoax, attention-seeking. That's fine. I'm not trying to convince skeptics. I'm trying to warn the people who might actually listen. If you know someone who went missing in the Pine Barrens in autumn, especially near water, there's a chance you know what happened now. Not the explanation you wanted. Not one that brings closure or makes sense of the loss, but the truth, as close as I can give it to you. And if you're planning to go there yourself, to the deep interior, to the restricted watershed areas, to the places where the maps show nothing but green, don't go alone. Don't go at dusk. And for God's sake, if you hear wings, run. I still have the footage. Encrypted, hidden, set to release if anything happens to me. That's my dead man's switch. My insurance that the truth survives even if I don't. 5 years ago, I filmed something that shouldn't exist carrying someone who will never be identified. The official record says it didn't happen. The footage is classified. The search operation found no evidence of foul play. But I was there. I saw it. And I know it's still out there. Still hunting. Still taking people. And we keep calling it folklore because the truth is too uncomfortable to accept. This recording ends now. I won't be making another one. I've said everything I can say without exposing myself or making things worse. If you're listening to this in the Pine Barrens, get out. Before dark. If you're planning a trip there, reconsider. And if you see something in the trees with wings, don't look back. Just run.